righty. Our amazing theme song kind of has a different feel to it when you see a bunch of Space Marines, storming towards the enemy. I kind of like it. All right, we're back for another episode of Pony Express Radio. This one's going to be a little bit more of a chill stream and a nerd stream tonight. And look at that. People in the chat are already talking. Yes, no girls allowed. That is 100% correct. This is a 100% masculine, male only space tonight. All right. I'm joined by Warhammer expert, Mr. Raging Mandrill. How are you, sir?
Well, I doubt I'm an expert, but I'll do my best. But I'm good anyway.
All right. And we got Mr. Fahrenheidt is joining us tonight. How are you, Paul?
I'm very well. I wouldn't quite call myself a Warhammer expert, but I have a level of knowledge comparable to Mr. Mandrill.
And then we got Mr. Charlemagne is also joining us tonight. How are you, Charlie?
I'm good. I bring a bare minimum of knowledge on the Warhammer 40k setting with zero knowledge on Warhammer Fantasy, except for playing the video game. But I do like the Warhammer 40k, and I have a fairly sizable army and know a good deal about the setting, just not lots of the details that these other two fellows know.
Yeah, and I'm coming in with almost zero knowledge altogether, so this should be interesting. But as always, we do need to keep the lights on over here, so we need to go through our list of sponsors as always. So from the top, if you too want to get jacked like a Space Marine in time for White Boy Summer to return, please head over to Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. The link is in the description, and you too can get shredded like the guys on the thumbnail. While you're at it, if you need a caffeine fix, head on over to Fox & Sons Coffee. I know Charlie is a user of Fox & Sons Coffee, among many other OGC guys, and they give it good reviews. So head on over to Fox & Sons. Also, this episode is brought to you by Alp Nicotine Pouches, which Alp is getting me through tax season. Sorry, I had to sneeze there. Through tax season, so head on over to Alps, get your nicotine fix, because we here at the OGC are fans of big tobacco. While you're at it, you guys need to be dressing excellently. Head on over to MS Mandrill Suits, where you guys can get the best looking wear that all of the OGC guys will be sporting at all of our conferences. And you can immediately pick out who is wearing a Vendrillo suit and who is not at these things. I'm looking forward to getting fitted for one this year myself. And finally, head on over to Tall Man Books, for our good friend, Mr. George Bagby, is bringing back into print many books detailing American history from the 18th, 19th, 20th century and beyond. So head on over and support our good friend, Mr. Bagby. So, all right, gentlemen, why don't we get into the actual story in the meat of the matter for this evening. So, guys, why don't somebody just give me the elevator pitch for why somebody should be interested in Warhammer 40K in the year 2026?
Well, Mandrill, you want to take this one, or should I?
I mean, because it's cool. There, I said it. That's it.
Yeah. That's a pretty good summary of it. It's a very cool setting, or at least it was until the canon got put into the hands of a team of millennial women who now work for Games Workshop, who are just totally ruining everything, like they ruin all media. But so Warhammer 40K, and the first and foremost, right? Because I know there are going to be some old heads in the audience who are going to be very mad if this whole stream is just about that. So the first and biggest distinction in Warhammer as a fandom is the distinction between Warhammer Fantasy, which was the original, and Warhammer 40K, which was a kind of goofy spin-off that took on a whole life of its own. And now you could even argue it's even more famous than the original setting, Warhammer Fantasy, that
I certainly knew about the 40K stuff way before I even knew that they had a fantasy setting.
Yes. Warhammer is named after the setting is named after an item within the setting. It's a hammer called Galmaraz, which belonged to a character in the fantasy setting by the name of Sigmar, who then later founded the Empire, which is somewhat similar to the Empire of Man in 40K, but just it's basically not the Holy Roman Empire, not Germany. because Warhammer Fantasy, as it is named, takes place in a fantasy setting. And you have various nations spread throughout it at various different technological levels. You have the realms of men, you have elves, you have all the Tolkien stuff, you have vampires, necromancers,
Tomb Kings.
Tomb Kings, which are basically, necromancer Egyptians, or I guess lich Egyptians would be a better description of it. Orcs, beastmen, like all kinds of things. Anything you can imagine, it exists in Warhammer Fantasy. If it could conceivably exist in a medieval world / Renaissance world / fantasy world, it's all that. Whereas Warhammer 40K is a sci-fi setting that is set in the year 40,000. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Is the kind of the summary sentence of it. But the setting there's a whole bunch of lore behind it. But basically, it's a sci-fi setting where you have your human empire. That's the biggest power, but it's a declining power. And it's surrounded by all of these alien races that want to destroy it. Chaos, which are literal demons from an alternate dimension, of which there are portals into, I guess what you would call real space, that can corrupt people and often do. You have genetically engineered superhumans that are, almost demigods compared to your average human being. You have the emperor, who was once, almost a god, but was later damaged during an event, and is entombed on the golden throne, barely alive on life support for 10,000 years on Earth, and all this other stuff, and this is like the most broad description of both of the settings that I can give, and what the utility, I guess, of either of these settings is beyond your own personal entertainment. It's like all fiction settings, like all fantasy settings, sci-fi settings, is that they are a place where you can take ideas or conceptions of things where you are not constrained necessarily by the rules of historical continuity within our own time, right? And you can instead play with these ideas, create experimental states, conceive of the consequences of those and the interactions between those and other groups and all of that. So and a great deal of lore has been written on both in novels, video games, board games, and including the origin, the tabletop games, which was originally developed by Games Workshop in the 80s, if I remember correctly, for both of them, and it has gone through several iterations over time. But it's a multimedia fandom functionally, and it is still being developed. So I know that was a rather long-winded explanation, but when you're talking about these topics, it's very difficult to be short with both of them.
Yeah, it is very difficult to focus on any one element of it because, as I've mentioned many times before, Warhammer, both fantasy and 40K, are kind of, you might say, the Borgs of science fiction and high fantasy. Every trope which is present in Tolkien or Dune or any of these other well-beloved franchises are all in, Warhammer or fantasy. And it's also deeply residual as well because, Warhammer originally, or at least 40K, was very deeply influenced by the 80s punk culture of the time. This is a perfect example of what Bowden called the lower forms, right? Where all of our style of politics is represented, but in, it's essentially Pulp Fiction, but in, plastic crack for nerds, basically.
Yes, in terms of plastic crack, it's important to point out and remember that the tabletop wargame itself is the mainstay product and identity of Warhammer 40K. Although there are many great novels, there are many great video games and a couple that aren't. Those are always side elements to the actual tabletop itself, which not everyone who's into Warhammer 40k or Warhammer Fantasy, as it's called now, actually even plays the game, which is one of the interesting things about Warhammer, where you can be very into Warhammer, but you can come at the hobby from any number of angles, merely as a reader, if you just are interested in science fiction, and some of the early novels are actually excellent sci-fi novels, or if you're into wargaming, or if you just like, war video games or shooters, you can approach from that angle. Of course, the game itself, the property it's probably most comparable to is actually Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, of course, came out in the late 70s or mid 70s, depending on which edition you're talking about. And it developed out of the wargaming community, we could say, or more like the concept of wargaming itself, and turned it towards actually tailoring the mechanics to individual characters. And you can think of Warhammer, the original fantasy setting, as like sort of taking Dungeons and Dragons sort of back to its roots. And what if you actually made a tabletop game with that fantasy type setting that had, set sort of races and mechanics that you would play, and set stories. Some of the actual Dungeons and Dragons settings are based on the settings of the original creators, like RedHawk. But Warhammer Fantasy offers you the same thing, where there is a rich story to it with a rich setting filled with all this stuff. But if you play the tabletop, you can sort of create your own narratives around your battles. You could create your own custom campaign rules if you want to run series of battles. You could even modify the rules for smaller types of battles if you wanted. So it's kind of that's a great way to think about it if you're unfamiliar with it. Is like D&D but a war game, and without the role playing aspect, just the setting and the open sort of sandbox you're allowed to play in.
Yeah, it's interesting that D&D is an original connection point, because modern 40k has scaled up in terms of it's model sizes, and especially this is also true with Age of Sigmar, which isn't canon for me, but hey, the model sizes and the increase in model scale to the heroic scale size is pretty directly influenced by D&D itself. When you have, like, in terms of the market competition for these sorts of IPs, one of the distinction points is the actual painting hobby, right? Making a cool model, right? Is this a cool mini or not? And D&D created models that were substantially larger than normal Warhammer models, at least the ones that we're used to, which were on 25 millimeter bases, pretty much exclusively.
Yeah, that's
exceptions.
That's an aspect of the hobby I neglected, and it's actually kind of my main interest in it. I enjoy playing the tabletop war game, but to be honest, I enjoy simply the hobby of painting the miniatures quite a lot more, and it's a skill you can develop quite a lot, and even a marketable one if you want to take that to the level of business, because many people either don't have the time to build the skill or really the interest in painting, but they don't want their miniatures to simply be these blank gray templates. So even your miniatures themselves, when you buy them, you have to glue them and customize them and paint them yourself. And that's sort of like building the character of your army. If you choose to not strictly stick to one of the existing armies, which you can totally do, which I do, you can also develop your entirely own faction, which the lore is specifically set up at 40k, at least as far as I know. I'm sure it's like that in Warhammer as well. It's designed so that you can sandbox it like that and sort of play however you want. And yeah, the 30 millimeter scale is important too. It differentiates it a lot from more historical wargamings, which I think are 10 millimeter, where your battles are more like large skirmishes. You can think of the battles in Warhammer that you actually play on the tabletop, unless you use certain rules that it's not really tailored to, as like a zoomed in version of like a much larger battle taking place. Whereas if you're into Napoleonic wargaming or something, you might play like the entire Battle of Waterloo or something, where you have entire corps maneuvering and that sort of thing. Whereas Warhammer 40k, it's at the level of a few squads, and it kind of represents like one particular front or location in the sort of grand battle that's unfolding around you potentially. It's kind of even up to you whether or not you want to, how much you want to imagine that sort of stuff going on. The game relies a lot on the imagination, a lot like Dungeons and Dragons does, to sort of fill out the battle space that you're playing through.
Oh man, this picture on the screen, this must be from like 6th edition because I can see the guard Valkyrie spam. Oh man, this brings back a lot of memories.
I just have not the slightest idea what is going on with this image.
Yeah, so a small digression about, I guess, wargaming generally. I know we did a chapter house with the Middle Tennessee chapter, the Old Hickory's Volunteers, that I would highly recommend all of you go check out, as well as the rest of the chapter houses. But they already did a whole stream just dedicated to like wars and wargaming, like board games simulating different wartime scenarios and such. And it's one of my favorite chapter houses I've listened to so far. But to briefly recapitulate what they talked about in that, so that everyone kind of is on the same page as to what a war game is. The photo that you see on the screen here is a game of Warhammer 40K being played. As Mr. Mandrill stated, this is likely 6th edition. There are various, edition refers to a rule book. It's much like how in college, 2025 edition, every couple of years or so, the company will change and update the rules to their game, both to improve or, quote, improve, unquote, their game, but also to, I guess, keep things interesting, break up old metas, create new metas. So it makes sense that there's a cycling of rules every couple of years, because otherwise the game would just be more or less solved, and the same strategies would predominate forever. So, but there are different scales of war game, as Charlie talked about. I used to work at a dedicated game store, and I mostly played historicals at that time. But yes, you have all kinds of games. You can have like a Dungeons and Dragons type game where it's down to, like, I guess, a small party, or what we would call, I guess, a fire team, 4 people, 5 people, something like that. There are squad based games that are, closer to 10 or 12, individual, like XCOM type board games. Warhammer 40K has one called Kill Team. A lot of people who are trying to dip their toe into the hobby, they'll buy a Kill Team box, and it comes with a couple of models that are like the miniature individual soldiers you see down there on that photo. And then they can go all the way up to, as Charlie stated, playing out the entire Battle of Marengo with whole corps, whole divisions, with all the individual units. Obviously not like every single man. You can't fit 1 point something million people on a table, but like, represented, all the way up to even like theater level war games, in which whole armies are usually represented by smaller models. And war games there's different ways of playing them, but what separates a tabletop war game, a tabletop miniatures game, from, say, a board game, is that with a board game, everything comes inside the box. You purchase the game, and then there's a whole thing of just on board games. You can spend your whole life just playing different board games. But a tabletop war game is where you don't buy the table necessarily itself. You buy the miniatures, and you put the miniatures together, and you paint the miniatures. But at a game store or something to that effect, as you can see here, they have, terrain that you can use, buildings you can use, etc. So there's kind of it's almost like, I don't want to say poker, but like there's an element of ownership, but there's also an element of sharing something in common with other people, which is what makes it a really close-knit hobby, is that you feel like you own your army, because you take the time, you pay the money, you put the miniatures together, you glue them together, you get glue on your fingers, you cut yourself on accident when getting it out of the sprue if it's plastic. You get paint on yourself by painting. You might accidentally paint something. You have to learn how to paint something. You have to prime, if you want it to look good, you have to prime it. You have to get detail brushes. You have to learn how they look. You have to put certain washes on them and all of that. And at the end, and if it comes together the way you want it to, you feel invested and satisfied with the army that you have put together. And there's nothing more that you want to do than to take it to your local game store on a Thursday or a Friday evening when it's Warhammer night and play all your other nerdy friends who have done the same things, or more likely have not done the same things to your army.
Right, unlike a traditional board game where someone owns the copy of the game and brings it and it comes in an entire box, you only bring your own army to the table, and an opponent brings their own army to the table. So you each have full ownership over a subset of the game pieces. Then the table itself, and such as in this picture, it's clearly at a game store. The table just may be at a neutral location. Or, you could just divide your own army up amongst your friends at your house and play on a regular table. So there's a number of ways to approach it. Also, unlike a traditional board game where everything is objective and restricted down to certain game spaces, the game here is completely free-flowing, where things are measured in inches and line of sight is measured, and there's a sort of subjective element that could even require a judge. It does have, of course, objective rules, but because of the infinite possibilities that can develop on the board, there's a lot of discernment that has to come in terms of actually measuring distances, like with a tape measure and that sort of thing. So it's sort of unlocked. It's like an unlocked board game in a sense, where you're not confined to particular lines on a board, like in a war game like Axis and Allies or something like that, for example. There's certain lines on a map, there's certain places units can be, that sort of thing, whereas there's infinitely configurable space on the board in Warhammer 40k and other war games.
I can certainly see the appeal from the many different fronts that you guys are describing as to why guys get invested in this for decades. In some cases that I've heard about, just the variability in everything. I'm just thinking as you guys are describing more and more of this, it's like, wow, that's an autism I kind of enjoy. That's an autism too, so there's many steps here that, sometimes I would just enjoy sitting down and painting, and sometimes I do want to just hang out with all my boys and blow each other up in various infinite variation.
But to be honest, the game itself is not that good. If I'm being honest, I think pretty much any war gamer would agree. It's just like not that good. It's just fun because it's Warhammer 40k, which is I think sort of the main thing we want to nerd into is the lore, the setting, everything about the actual fictional universe itself is what makes Warhammer really cool. The board game is fun and the miniatures look awesome. It looks awesome in person on a table like this when everyone has highly detailed miniatures and terrain they put effort into. But even though this is sort of the core of what Warhammer is and the main way the company Games Workshop makes money, which interestingly is one of the few sort of major hobby companies that has not been purchased by a larger conglomeration. Games Workshop is still just the sole proprietor of Warhammer, to the point where you're not even allowed as a store to sell miniatures online. Only they can sell them online at their website. But it's the Warhammer 40k is about the lore. Like that's what people get into it, and that's what they stick around for.
Yeah. Actually, let me throw this bone out real quick. I know Mr. Mandrill had something. Charlie, we had a little bit of a disagreement earlier today, and I'll throw you this little bone. Warhammer 40k, the tabletop game, is great the same way that the Star Wars prequels are great.
Yeah, that's fair.
So not at all.
Well, it's everything it's everything that surrounds them. That's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, this is a perfect segue. In order to pick an army that you're going to spend hours and hours and hours of your life painting and playing and all that, a great way to decide beyond just which ones look cool is the lore.
Right.
So
yeah,
my
go ahead. Tie into what I was going to say. I mean, for a deeply irony-saturated generation as millennials are, Warhammer, for lack of a better way of saying it is, Warhammer was the closest thing to a religion a lot of us probably actually had. Which is, of course, interesting. And I don't think that that's a coincidence either. I think that, the lore is deeply European in its aesthetic. It is obviously based upon more specifically metaphysical ideals between good and evil. You have an obviously evil faction. You have an obviously good factions. An obviously good faction in 40K, but then in fantasy, you have other ones. Fantasy's a little more different than 40K, whereas, obviously in 40K, the human faction is like the cool and based one, and then the elves are just kind of like an afterthought to the side almost. Different in fantasy, I guess, but anyway, go on, gentlemen.
Yeah, the elves in 40K are there for plot reasons, I guess. But yeah, like what is it? You are correct, because in something to talk about, what the two settings share, beyond general inspiration, just in different in the two most famous pulp genres being fantasy and sci-fi. Warhammer Fantasy is set in a fantasy universe, and then Warhammer 40K set in a sci-fi universe, but they share one key thing, which is the primary antagonists being the Chaos Gods. The Chaos Gods are the objectively evil, like clearly evil, like not actually the good guys. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And you can see them right here. You have Tzeentch on the far left, and then Nurgle, and then Khorne, and then Slaanesh on the right. So these four chaos gods all represent something different. If you're familiar with Carl Jung's concept of an egregore, these four chaos gods are egregores functionally of four different excesses of, of living beings. They have different creation stories, whether it's fantasy or 40K. However, they do share existence in both. And their various servants, which are called demons, including things like demon princes and corrupted men, corrupted elves, corrupted dwarves, or everything else. And again, in both 40K and fantasy, are all their servants, their minions. But
even down to the table board, if you play a demon's army, which is a faction you can model, paint, and play, the demon's army is fully transferable between either tabletop setting, and that's the only army that is like that.
Correct.
Yeah. That's a weird crossover, isn't it? Like, it's almost like the chaotic powers, the ruinous powers, as they're frequently these four on the screen right now are called in the lore. It's like these four powers are basically what underpins and connects both fantasy and 40K. And I wrote in my article on the subject a couple weeks ago about this whole connection, and a lot of this I think has something to do with Michael Moorcock and all of that stuff, and just the idea of these are all essentially not just egregores, but I guess negative archetypes, if you want to accept that. There's a crossover that I frequently make with other fantasy settings, like say Berserk, who also has the Godhead, which has 4 or 5 powers depending on your interpretation. So it's very similar, and they're also very similar in like form and appearance and function, right? You have the war god, you have the sexy god, you've got like the disgusting like god of corruption and rot, and then you have the god of knowledge and fate and all of that stuff. So very interesting connection points, Shirley.
Yeah,
I don't know how Slaanesh entered into the fantasy setting. Was Slaanesh always there, or was Slaanesh sort of spawned like in 40K?
In both settings, Slaanesh is the youngest. So this is another thing, right? These four chaos gods have a hierarchy amongst themselves, right? They're not equal, although there is what's called the great game of the jockeying for supremacy between the four of them. But they're not necessarily of equal power. But to be honest with you, I don't know how Slaanesh was created in fantasy. I know it wasn't the same way that it was in 40K. but in both instances, Slaanesh was created, I'm sure, out of an excess of depressed. So, matter of fact, we might as well go through. I'm going to go through them not in order as they are on the screen, but in order of their age and their power. Right. So, starting with the oldest and the most powerful is Khorne, who is the third from the left on your screen, the one with the armor and the red. That is the obviously he is the god of war, of bloodshed, of slaughter, of combat, of all this other stuff. This saying is blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, because he sits on a throne made of skulls, etc., right? And he is the oldest and the most powerful of the four chaos gods. All of his demon servants are red berserkers who are extremely powerful in combat, but not particularly smart, because he doesn't care from where the blood flows, whether it's his own people or other people. All he wants is for blood to constantly be flowing. Second oldest and second most powerful is the one on the far left, which is Tzeentch. Tzeentch is the chaos god of fate, of scheming, of plans. He typically very influenced by Lovecraftian themes, Cthulhu and all this other stuff. He is typically depicted as either a swirling mass of tentacles, or as a more avian bird-like figure, or as a collection of eyes. All of his servants, his weavers of what is it? Not
Weavers, yeah.
Yeah, fate weavers. That's right. Yeah, and all four of these chaos gods have like a special kind of demon prince, which is like a lesser, I guess, not quite a god, and there are also, these are the four main chaos gods, but there are like lesser chaos gods as well. But that's way too long to get into.
Yeah, that's more in Warhammer Fantasy too, because the Chaos Dwarves have Hashut, and then the Skaven have the Great Horned Rat, which those are both minor Chaos gods. The big four Chaos gods are the ones that you see on screen. And of course, speaking of greater and lesser, each of these Chaos gods has their own unique greater demons. So there's a greater demon of Slaanesh, greater demon of Khorne, which is Bloodthirster, right? Which is probably one of the more iconic greater demons that you would ever encounter in Warhammer Fantasy. That's the one everybody would look at and be like, oh, that's fucking cool. And then you have the lesser demons, right? So you have, Bloodthirsters, or like pink horrors, or demonettes, that sort of thing. Demonettes are obviously also pretty distinct, because they look exactly like Slaanesh does in this photo here. But yeah, so yeah.
And again, like, there is very much a hierarchy in the daemonic world. But yes, Tzeentch's plots and schemes, and he's always constantly planning, I guess you could say theory selling, the best way to gain supremacy over the other four gods, or the other three gods rather. And he also meddles with the minds of men and such, and all this other thing. Typically magic, or I guess in the 40K setting, psychers are the esoteric, the arcane, forbidden knowledge. Like I said, very Lovecraftian themed and focused.
We should also clarify one of the important things about Tzeentch, which is that he's a chaos god of change for change's sake. He doesn't, like, he has plans within plans, but he schemes against his own plans sometimes. He's just about scheming and planning, period. He doesn't have like a grand plan to win, the struggle for power between these four, for example. It's literally just about planning and scheming and change, most importantly, above all things.
Right. There's an interesting dichotomy between Khorne and Tzeentch, this is reflected even in some of the other weirder aspects of lore, right? When you start talking about the human emotions that all of these gods are drawn from, and Khorne basically is pretty stereotypical, masculine warrior archetype, and he has a tendency to disdain magic. Khorne warriors don't like to use ranged combat. They're all about close combat, obviously. In the 40k lore, even, especially in the Forest Heresy books, since they don't like magic, the Warhammer version of magic is a wizard is essentially called a psyker, and a psyker is being a magician isn't. Khorne's warriors in 40k basically have these thing called the butcher's nails, which are like these really irritating things that force them to go into combat, and the only way that they can, relieve their constant pain and agitation from these things being inserted in their brain is to engage in bloodshed. Well, the way this relates to Tzeentch is that psyker magic essentially makes their brains, their butcher's nails, irritated, and that's one of the reasons why they don't like psychers. But yeah, it's pretty stereotypical, like basic high fantasy stuff. The barbarian berserker isn't going to have a whole lot of respect for the magic user.
Yes. Further, then that brings us to the third most powerful and the third oldest of these chaos gods, which is Nurgle. You can guess which one is Nurgle. He is the second one from the left. He is the god of rot, of plagues, of filth generally, of decay, similar things to that, right? Nurgle
is jolly. He's incredibly jolly.
Yes, exactly. His goal, his desire is to see his beautiful children, his family, his garden, all this other stuff of these plagues, of these putrid filth, of all this other stuff, overtake everything, overtake all of existence. He loves plagues. He sees the spread of disease as the spreading of his children all throughout the world, and all of his servants are constantly looking to do that. It's really disgusting, frankly. It's the most disgusting of the four. And if you actually see the demons, they're quite filthy. I personally don't like Nurgle or playing as Nurgle, despite how powerful Nurgle tends to be in at least in the Warhammer Total War Warhammer game, or all as well in the tabletop. They're extremely high health, very much enduring units.
There's an interesting overlap here too, especially with the Eldar deities. There's a connection point between Nurgle, but also Khorne technically. But so Nurgle, because he is the god of rot and disease and death and decay, he in both fantasy and 40k has captured the Eldar goddess Isha, who is basically the goddess of life, pretty much, in the Eldar pantheon. And so in the lore, the goddess of Isha is just like, she's not really present in the Eldar pantheon, or she's powerless, just because she's been in Nurgle's prison the whole setting. So, and she's never escaped. So there's this weird connection point between life and death here. And maybe you can make some morbid jokes because Nurgle is supposed to adore her and that sort of thing. So it's like, even if you're a fat, disgusting, obese, neckbeard slob, you too can have a waifu,
Oof. All right. Tell me about Slaanesh. Now, this is the only one of the four that I actually knew anything about, because I just had no exposure to the universe. But I always knew like whenever there's a Troon online or something, I would see people quoting oh, this is Slaanesh or something like that in the comments.
So Slaanesh is the most topical, I would say, of the four in our current era. Would you guys agree?
Oh, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and as the era changes, Slaanesh might be less topical, and another one of these four might be more symbolic of the era to come. However, Slaanesh is the goddess.
I think we've been in a progression, to be honest.
Yeah.
We've had Nurgle with COVID. We've had Korn satisfied with Ukraine. What is Zinch doing? Nobody knows.
I mean, I guess if you're a follower of Zinch, you should trust the plan.
Yeah.
And the reality is that there is no plan, but that was all a part of the plan, was to have no plan. And actually the criticism of the plan was all a part of a third plan anyway, I'm kind of getting carried away. And basically that to infinity is Zinch. But Slaanesh is that's why I say kind of goddesses, purposely hermaphroditical.
Yeah. It's her name. The name Slaanesh in Eldar, or basically the Elder name for Slaanesh is she who thirsts, right? So you can tell that this is like, it's just a very sensual figure, and it's purposely hermaphroditic because it has to do with sex and excess, right? It's both pleasure and all of that.
Yeah, but not just sex, right? Slaanesh is any and all excess of pleasure, and in that way, Slaanesh and Nurgle kind of have a dichotomy in the way that Khorne and Tzeentch kind of have a dichotomy, because Slaanesh is, exquisite food, the most beautiful clothing, the finest ointments and makeup, and all kinds of deviant sexual practices and music, and basically all, like, everything that you could like a bon vivant. Slaanesh is kind of a caricature of the cultured individual who's like sort of pleasure seeking, but it also appeals to like the depraved porn addict. It's kind of both are similarly situated, right? Where like they're both chasing, whether you're a bon vivant who needs like a super a cow has to have been raised in this region of the Argentinian highlands on a diet of nothing but milk, and like that, alongside the just chasing ever more and more and more just insane highs on the internet. Drugs is another part of this. All of that. That's all Slaanesh. Any kind of excess. And, Slaanesh's demons reflect this. Slaanesh has male demons, female demons, but really the greater demons of Slaanesh are all kind of hermaphroditic, like the Keepers of Secrets. Sort of, are they a man demon? Are they a woman demon? I don't know the difference. I don't know how to differentiate between and that's the whole purpose of them, right? It's meant to confuse and to dull the senses with but with pleasure, whether it's of a sexual nature or any sensory information that is pleasurable, is Slaanesh. And that's why I believe Slaanesh is actually the most topical of our present age, because everyone immediately talks about the sex as the highest pleasure.
You should also mention the highest physical pain. Pain is exactly also one of Slaanesh's things, excessive pain too, along with the pleasure.
Yes, that's a good point.
This is part of chasing the high, right? Eventually, there's no pleasure other than pain, right? It's very it's very Hellraiser, right?
Yeah, you're always outrunning the crash, So ultimately, right? And I know what point I was going to bring it into. So both in the fantasy universe and in the 40K universe, these 4 chaos gods and their aspects are everywhere in every living being, be it human, Eldar, Dwarven, anything else, right? And they can pop up lore-wise anywhere. If a great human warrior starts enjoying the bloodshed a little bit too much, Khorne is there whispering in his ear. Or even I get, this is something I read in one of the waiting screens, but even a butcher, just a typical street butcher, who starts to enjoy the blood aspect a little bit too much, Khorne is there. Someone who doesn't clean their room or clean or keep their house in order. Nurgle is there. Someone who in a city who desires a governmental position and starts looking at all of the obstacles in his way and starts thinking on more and more elaborate ways on how to remove each of these obstacles. Tzeentch is there. Someone who is, like not wealthy, but well-to-do, who really, really, really enjoys coming home and listening to a particular type of music that they can play on like a musical player, and they start losing themselves in the music and the pleasurable sensations of it. Slanesh is there, right? Any of these scenarios, right? And there's a potentially infinite, right? And it's not everyone, right? People go around in both of these universes and they're filthy and they conduct bloodshed and they make their plans and they enjoy their pleasures without falling to these chaos gods. But the point of what these chaos gods are meant to convey within these universes are what happens when these particular human, or I guess in the 40K sense, organic traits go to an extreme really beyond which one can recover.
It's also worth mentioning that no one ever really sees these gods in universe. It's extremely rare. They're encountered as forces or through their lesser or greater aspects that they send out, which they basically have infinite minions with which to perform their bidding in the physical world. So although these gods do exist, they don't interact with the world in any real corporal form themselves. They also have their own realm, at least in 40K. I assume it's the same in fantasy, which is basically hell, but it's called the Warp. It's kind of like in Diablo, the video games, hell exists, and it's this place where all the demons live, and it's their domain, but it's also a place that you can go and also leave. So the Warp is effectively just another name for hell, and that's the actual dimension. It's a separate dimension, like hell, where all of these gods, quote unquote, live, and all their demons live in a more permanent sense, although they do leave the Warp and enter other planes of existence.
Right. I think we should probably mention the specifically 40K, the dynamic of how that setting solves the problem of interdimensional or space travel, of galactic space travel. And the way that they do this is by, ships basically have to enter the warp, and that is how you fold space-time and go travel without, using a regular jet engine and spend a decade going to a different planet or something. Now, of course, they cannot do this without the aid of special technology. They need a Geller field. They need a navigator who is able to tune into the Astronomicon, which is essentially a psychic beacon. It's like a lighthouse sort of thing. And it's based upon the Emperor himself, right? This is why it's very necessary for the Imperium to maintain itself and to maintain the Emperor, because without the Emperor, on the Golden Throne, there is providing the light of the Golden Throne in the Warp. There is no navigation through the Warp, right? There is no space travel. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the Warp as a zone is a roiling, seething sea. It is the vastness of human emotion and expansiveness. It's it's kind of like social media in a way. Every human thought, every human emotion is available to view on full display. Every extremity, all pain, all happiness, all suffering, everything. And people, if they view it from the viewport of a warship like the one you see on screen, they tend to go mad if they don't have their mind properly protected.
Yeah, so very similar to the internet and social media. I guess since you mentioned the Astronomicon and the Emperor, the Golden Throne, we should probably actually talk about 30K, which is sort of essential to what 40K is, and get a little deeper into the lore.
Yeah. So Warhammer 30K is a name for the tabletop game that refers to the setting of the 31st millennium. So, and this is the archetype. This is the perfect picture that encapsulates this period, right? So, I'll explain that. Yeah, the Horus Heresy is the alternative name for 30K, right? So Warhammer 40K is set during a declining empire, an empire that has gone through 10,000 years of decline, of worsening, of sectors collapsing, of losing planets, of bad leadership, of corruption, of valor in various places, but ultimately it's not what it used to be. Whereas Warhammer 30K, set in the 31st millennium, takes place 10,000 years before that, right? This is when the empire is at its height. It's expanding. It has coherent systems. It is well set up. You know, you have this great crusade going out from Earth and encapsulating more and more and more and more and more worlds. But before I explain 30K, I have to briefly explain how we got to that. I promise that I'm not going to take up a whole time. There's actually a great 2-minute video. I forget who put that together a long time ago explaining it. And that's what got me initially into 40K. But suffice it to say, Earth went through regular history, and then it got into Star Trek future, where there was a federation of planets where humanity colonized a great amount of the galaxy with science and technology and all this other stuff, and like light speed travel or whatever. And then the birth of the Chaos God Slanesh from the space elves, the Eldar, which I don't have time to explain, basically caused this massive storm that ripped everything apart. And humanity's intergalactic civilization was functionally thrown into a dark age because a lot of these planets, pretty much all of them, lost contact with each other. Some of them had retained more technology than others, but this was the case for a very long time, including on Earth, which fell into the the techno dark age, the dark age of technology. That's what it was called, the dark age of technology, where Earth was ruled by various techno barbarians who enhanced themselves with all kinds of drugs and super soldier techniques and genetic modifications and prosthetics and all this other stuff. And then out of nowhere comes this guy on the right in the golden armor. This is the Emperor of Man, also known as Conan the Barbarian, also known as a lot of other things, who in the lore has appeared as various guises throughout history, attempting to guide humanity. And he himself was created back in the Stone Age when a whole bunch of shamans decided to commit mass suicide and reincarnate into a single soul. The shamans are early psychers that we talked about earlier in the lore. And then he reincarnates. And throughout history, he has various people he plays as until we get to the present day. Or the present of the dark age of technology, where him and his he comes out of his lab in the Himalayas and with an army of super soldiers called the Thunder Warriors, and he goes around and he conquers everyone on Earth. And after he conquers and he reunifies,
he betrays the Thunder Warriors.
Well, we're skipping a key point, because between the conquering everyone and the betraying the Thunder Warriors, he creates the second, more stable generation of warriors known as the Space Marines. Right? I believe the Space Marines actually do predate the Primarchs, or they're kind of simultaneous, because the Space Marines are being used before the Primarchs are revealed, though the Space Marines are based on the Primarch's DNA. So these are the Space Marines.
There's a key. They're basically simultaneous, right? So yes, the Space Marines were created based off the Primarch's DNA, but the powers of chaos, the ruinous powers, essentially got a hold of the.
They don't know what the Primarchs are yet. Hold on.
And then they got scattered across the galaxy, basically, and they have their own individual stories, and they get all united with their legions. So, Space Marines later.
They don't know what the Primarchs are yet, so I'll tell them what the Primarchs are. So the Primarchs are basically the sons. Oh, here we go. Man, we were prepared for tonight, weren't we? So we're lightning round, all right? So these are all the Primarchs. Okay, and I could literally name all of them for you right now. But I mean, honestly, all 98 of you have probably played Warhammer and are probably familiar with the lore. But you have all the Primarchs here. There is 18 of them, right? Although I guess that's the Emperor of Man in the center. I guess technically 19 of them if you count these last two in the bottom right corner as two separate ones. And then you see there are two locked doors, and that is because when the lore was originally written for the Primarchs in Warhammer 40K, there were two missing Primarchs that of the 20 that were never identified, that were never found, or that were found but were later expunged from records. Originally, this was because the creators wanted to leave it up to players to come up with their own Primarchs. But over time, as the setting has kind of become more concrete, it's kind of become a permanent thing that these two missing Primarchs have been lost. And, who knows? The millennial women might bring them back as they were expunged because they were two women Primarchs. And if that's the case...
This is an important point on the way the lore is conveyed, because, okay, how are they missing? Well, they weren't missing from the Emperor's point of view, right? But the lore is sort of told from the 40K, 41st Millennium point of view through in-universe sources, which means that because the lore is not transmitted to the general public through like sort of objective fact, it's transmitted through in-universe perspective, which means you also have a concept, sort of a potentially unreliable author. So we don't know who these two Primarchs are outside of the lore because it's told from the perspective of 40K, and they don't know who these Primarchs are. And this will be important later when we talk about how the lore is resistant to certain types of Tzeentch change.
Yes. So these 18, or I guess 21 Primarchs, if you count the two missing ones, are all created from... Sometimes he later becomes called the God Emperor of Mankind, but at this period of time, he is just the Emperor of Mankind. They are all created from his DNA to reflect a different aspect, and to lead legions of genetically modified super soldiers called Space Marines, or Adeptus Astartes, whatever the pig Latin, to go out and reconquer all of humanity's lost territory from Xenos, from aliens. The Emperor knows about the existence of the Chaos Gods at the time of the Terran unification and the Great Crusade, but he wants to create a fedora-tipping cult of atheism and reason and logic. So
to keep the Chaos Gods out, basically.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Because
the Chaos Gods feed off of human emotion, right?
Correct.
Humanity is essentially almost going the fate of the Eldar, becoming psychically aware, and that's why the Chaos Gods are doing what they do. They want to make humanity into a psyker people, basically.
Yes.
So,
yes, that's exactly.
Talent is latent and rare in humanity in the age of the 30th and 41st millennium.
Though increasingly common.
So no religion, no demons, basically, is the idea.
Initially, yes. And this is, again, to starve the Chaos Gods to death, because the Emperor doesn't want this game to keep going. He also keeps this from his sons, though, right? Now, his sons were initially created and bred in a laboratory. But the Chaos Gods catch wind of the Emperor's plan, and they break into the laboratory and suck all of the Primarchs. I could give a spoiler here, but suck all of the Primarchs in quotation marks out of the Emperor's lab and throws them into the warp, which is the demon dimension that is kind of also how you do faster than light travel through real space to get all the way across the galaxy. There was a recent lore change that created a female character that will not be named. That is the reason that these Primarchs were thrown into the warp, which basically turned the whole like key event of Warhammer 40K being the Horus heresy into a custody battle, which I hate and I don't want to acknowledge. If you know the lore, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just pretend that this recent lore change never happened. But they all get sucked out and thrown across the galaxy. Lightning round, Mr. Mandrill or Mr. Charlemagne. Can you name all of them?
Well, yeah, you got what? You want to start at the top left?
Yeah, go in chronological order.
All right. Well, let's see if I can zoom my screen in here because I've got. Okay, so you got what is that? Lionel Johnson, who's number 1. You got Fulcrum. You got
number them all. Number them all.
Okay, so number 1, Lionel Johnson. Number 2, Fulgrim. Number 3, Perturbo.
Number 2 is the missing Primarch.
Oh
number
yeah,
three is Fulgrim.
Yeah. Number 3 is Fulgrim. Number 4 is Perturbo. Number 5 is Juggertai Khan. Number 6 is Ferrus Manus. The Primarch of the Space Wolves.
Leman Russ.
Leman Russ. Yeah, I don't know why I forget that. I'm a Imperial Guard player. It's been too long. Then you've got Robots Gilliman next.
Nope. Okay, Mandrill's out. Charlie, continue.
No, I can't.
Okay, I guess I'll do it then. Number 7 is Rogel Dorn. Number 8 is Conrad Kurz. I guess you could name their legions too, but they all have legions. Number 9 is Sanguinius. Number 10 is Ferrus Manus. Number 11 is the second missing Primarch. Number 12 is the number of Khorne, is Angron. Number 13 is Reboot Gilliman. Number 14 is Nurgle, or not Nurgle, sorry, Mortarion, excuse me. Number 15 is, what's his name? Magnus the Red. Number 16 is Horus Lupercal. It's called the Horus Heresy, which is this key event, so keep that name in mind. Number 17 is Lorgar Aurelian. Number 18 is Vulcan. Number 19 is Corvus Corax. And number 20 is Alfarius Omegon. As you can see, they are twins. But which one is which? We will never know. Except they do know if you read the book Head of the Hydra, which is the true story of the true final real story of Alfarius and Omegon. But this has been a running joke for like several years. All of these Primarchs have different personality, and this is really, in my opinion, and the reason why we're talking about this and we're spending time on this is because I believe that the Primarchs are probably the single best part of the entirety of the Warhammer 40K franchise. Like the different personalities, the different legions. The Space Marines are the poster boys of the franchise, and these are the poster boys of the Space Marines. And their personal dynamics and their interplays between each other, they all represent different aspects of people. You know, number 1 in the top left corner, Lionel Johnson. He's the firstborn. He has a firstborn son. He has this Arthurian knightly thing going on. And his legion, the Dark Angels, are what every single right-winger plays. You know, and I could go through all of them. I could name all, 19 of them technically, and all the different aspects of it. But I guess that would kind of take the fun away from those of you who haven't played the game so far. But they all have a thing. They all have a thing that makes them special, that makes them different, that makes them unique. And the Emperor of Mankind goes around the universe after he unifies Terra, and his sons, the Primarchs, are sucked out of his lab and sent across the universe. He goes out from Terra and slowly starts looking for them and finding them one by one. And the first one that he finds is number 16, Horus Lupercal, right? Who is raised under him, has spent the longest time with him of any of these other Primarchs, right? And Horus is kind of the golden boy of all the other Primarchs. Even though Lionel Johnson is the firstborn, Lionel Johnson is kind of a loner, kind of an autist. is respected but not particularly liked by the rest of his brothers, whereas Horus is both respected, feared, and loved by almost every other person, including the particularly bad ones. But all of these Primarchs were taken, and they all landed on different homeworlds with different levels of technological development, with different power structures, with different backgrounds. And they were found on these planets by different people and forced into different roles. And I'm sure you can tell, if you look at each individual photo, I'm sure you can tell, just by kind of seeing them, what worlds these guys fell on to a certain extent. Everywhere from like a very well civilized, developed world based with philosophy and well developed politics and such, to an outright toxic wasteland. Like from all levels in between. And it makes you wonder how much of what happened next was a result of the inherent traits of the Primarchs, and how much of it was a result of the worlds that they fell on and the people that they fell into the hands of. But all of these Primarchs basically save a couple, basically conquered their world by the time the Emperor found them. And Horus Lupercal was the golden boy of all of them, conquered the most planets, brought the most worlds to Dominion, had one of the largest legions. And after a major battle, he was given the title of War Master, which basically means second in command, second only to the Emperor himself, in terms of authority over the Primarchs. And he was chosen because basically all of the Primarchs loved him. And then the man to his right, number 17, Lorgar Aurelian, happened. Lorgar, of all of the Primarchs, landed on a desert world that was extremely religious. Can you guess what they worshipped?
The Chaos Gods.
Correct. So Lorgar was adopted by a priest on that world named Kor Pharaon. And they didn't consciously know that they were the Chaos Gods. They had different names for them, right? But that was there. Now, when the Emperor arrived onto Lorgar's homeworld, Lorgar instantly saw him as a god and swore fealty to him and obeyed it. This is also, this is basically, this setting is kind of the creation of a bunch of cynical Brits in the 80s who kind of hate religion, just generally. So Lorgar is kind of the caricature of the fanatical zealot. But Lorgar sees the Emperor as a god. The Emperor does not want Lorgar to see him as this didn't happen immediately, but the Emperor does not want Lorgar to see him as a god. But Lorgar insists. So the Emperor decides to grab number 13, good old rowboat gorilla man, Rabute Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, which might be the only legion you ever heard of these guys, to come to Lorgar and his home world that he built as a shrine to the God Emperor and burn it to the ground, and then force Lorgar and his entire legion to kneel. And that broke something within Lorgar. And so Lorgar and a couple of people in his legion from that planet who held on to the old ways, let's just say, had a little bit of a change of conscience. And they keep it secret, but Lorgar manages to be campaigning with Horus Lupercal while Horus Lupercal gets very badly injured. And then when he's very badly injured and in a coma, Lorgar starts whispering sweet nothings into his ears. And then before they know it, Horus, through the leading of Lorgar and one of his chaplains by the name of Erebus, have fallen to chaos. But again, it's secret. And so secretly, other Primarchs start falling to chaos. You can guess who by looking. Or at least you might potentially guess who. Until half of the Primarchs have fallen to chaos and kept it secret until Horus launches the what is it? A couple of legions go rogue at first and slaughter the loyalist elements of their legion, because even though the Primarch had gone, not every Marine in the legion had gone. And this is another tension explored, but I'm not going to get into that. And they are at the planet of Istvan 3, having slaughtered all of the loyalist elements of their legions. Then they hold out on a planet called Istvan 5. Horus has not yet revealed himself as a heretic, so he is maneuvering a couple of loyalist legions and a couple of heretic legions to drop the loyalist legions on this planet called Istvan 5 to slaughter the openly heretic legions with secretly heretic legions behind them, catching them in a trap. This goes very well. As you can see, Horus surrounds the loyalist legions with all of these traitor legions. For some of them revealed, some of them only just revealed when the knife is slid in. And these loyalist legions don't see it coming, and they almost all get slaughtered to a man, including the Primarch of one of them by the name of Ferrus Manus, who is killed. This begins the Horus Heresy. The, up until this point, greatly expanding, greatly powerful Imperium of Man is torn in two between one half of the Primarchs who have stayed loyal to the Empire and who haven't fallen to chaos, minus Ferrus Manus, of course, who unfortunately had to get ahead in life. They can't all be winners. And the other half of the Primarchs who have fallen to chaos and are following the War Master Horus. Which brings us back to that initial photograph that exemplifies the Horus Heresy of the Emperor and Horus standing aboard Horus's flagship. What was Horus's flagship name again? I don't remember. Vengeful Spirit, I think, is what it was called. And this is a very old photograph, but who you see there lying on the ground is the Primarch Sanguinius, who Horus has killed. Basically, long story short, Horus goes on this rampaging civil war, and you can read about it in the Horus Heresy novels. There's a ton of them. I think they just wrote the last one, and it ends with the Siege of Terra, where Horus and all of the traitor Primarchs besiege Terra, Earth, particularly the Emperor's Golden Throne, and it's almost endgame. But a crazy harebrained scheme is hatched at the last minute where the Emperor and a couple of Primarchs and some of his soldiers are teleported onto Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, and they fight their way to the bridge where Sanguinius, the Golden Sun, the angel, because he literally has wings, that's a mutation that he has, the Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion, confronts Horus, his brother, who kills him. And the Emperor arrives, and the Emperor and Horus battle each other. And I'm not going to get into the whole Alanius Pius thing. That was a cool moment that then unfortunately had to get lore added to it. So you can look into that yourself. But the Emperor and Horus battle, and the Emperor is able to defeat and to shatter Horus with mind bullets, basically having him cease to exist. At this point, Horus is probably even more powerful than the Emperor, but he is and he has favor from all four Chaos gods pouring into him, meaning he's kind of a demon prince, a demon Primarch of Chaos Undivided. But the Emperor is able to use his superior psychic abilities to just totally shatter Horus, cutting off the head of the Horus Heresy and sending all of the traitor Primarchs packing away back into the warp, where they become more and more like the demons that they have chosen to be. But the Emperor, it doesn't cost the Emperor nothing. The Emperor is nearly killed, and he is carried off the ship by his son Rogel Dorn, and he is put on the Golden Throne, which is this massive machine at the center of his Golden Palace that powers the navigation system that every Imperial ship uses to traverse the warp in order to make it from planet to planet. And he is functionally there on life support at the cost of, 2,000 souls a day.
10,000.
10,000 souls a day to keep him alive.
Psychers,
basically.
I believe.
Yes, 10,000 psychers a day are
Yes.
sacrificed to keep him alive. As you can see, the contrast between the Emperor in life and the Emperor on the Golden Throne. Also, he's the only thing that keeps a massive wave of demons from instantly overpowering everyone on Terra, and the whole world, the whole universe. And from there, from that event, the next 10,000 years are just a period of long decline until you make it to the 41st millennium and the new lore changes, which to say are receiving
Well,
a
they don't
somewhat
exist.
mixed receiving a somewhat mixed reception. I personally liked that they brought back Gilliman. I thought that was a pretty cool arc, actually. You might say that I'm stupid and easily pleased, but it was initially very promising. I'm like, yeah, finally we're moving the plot along a little bit, but
Yeah, well, the lore is the central lore for 40K is very old, so the quote unquote plot, like the main story of the setting, Warhammer 40K, hasn't substantially changed in decades. So something that's been happening in the last few years is these Primarchs are coming back. So I think you didn't actually mention that not only is the Emperor effectively killed and turned into this basically zombie that may or may not even be alive after all, although I think there's new lore about that, the Primarchs also were scattered to the winds and disappeared. So there are no Primarchs in Warhammer 40K until the last few years.
Yeah, they brought back Angron, they brought back Magnus, they brought back Rabute. I think they brought back Lionel Johnson too, and Lorgar is apparently
so
MIA still.
Yeah, so the demon Primarchs, the Primarchs who fell to chaos, never went away because they survived the heresy, but they became demons, right? This is Magnus the Red right here. This is Demon Magnus. What's interesting is that 4 of the Primarchs become demons of a particular chaos god, whereas I think the other 4 become demon princes of chaos undivided. Although I think Conrad Kurz was killed.
Yeah, Kurz was killed.
Yeah,
Boris was killed.
Some of them are killed, both loyalist and demon. But the demons, Magnus becomes a demon prince of Tzeentch, Mortarion becomes a demon prince of Nurgle, Angron becomes a demon prince of Khorne, and who was the 4th? Oh yes, Fulgrim becomes a demon prince of Slaanesh. All right, they all, and then Perturabo, Chaos Undivided, Lorgar, Chaos Undivided. Is there one I'm missing? Alfarius Omegon? Question mark.
As far as we know, they don't. But yes.
Yes, and that's another thing, I guess, is we have to, you could mention the Alpha Legion and the whole can of worms that opens up. But all the legions have different personalities, just as the Primarchs have different personalities. But what happened was they started bringing back the loyalist Primarchs. They started with Rabute Gilliman, because the loyalist Primarchs survived the Horus heresies. It's just in the millennium immediately after, they all, go into various places. They all vanish, or are killed, supposedly. I think the last loyalist one that was around was Vulcan. That was there for the War of the Beast, which is a pretty good novel series. Immediately set basically a couple hundred years after the Horus Heresy, where the empire is in a pretty bad place. And then Vulcan vanishes, and that's the last Primarch gone. But what happened was in 40K is that some of these Primarchs were kept preserved. Gilliman was frozen moments before death after getting his neck sliced by a poison weapon, and then somehow he gets revived and brought back to life, and he is made, I think, Lord Regent of the Imperium or something like that. And I thought it was very promising and hopeful, because it was like, after what, 30 years of stuck lore, or just developed stuck lore, like, okay, now we're getting a little bit of a renaissance. We've got a new guy at the helm. And then it's just totally careened off course and been utterly abused by millennial women and boomers who want to cash out and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
you were born gay. Enjoy it.
Wow, that's new. So I guess we could bring this around to the modern audience, shall we say? Right. I mean, my basic understanding of the space basically came from Sargon and Arch Warhammer talking about this on stream, like back in Gamergate days in the late 2010s and stuff, about how Games Workshop just really hates their audience. And I guess that hasn't really changed much still. I mean, I know they put in female custodies or space marines or something recently, so they're still on track to just completely hating their audience. I'm surprised you guys mentioned early in the show they haven't been bought out by somebody else. Like, it's still the same guys from the very beginning. They just have been captured from the inside.
No, they're a publicly traded company, so yeah, that tells you everything you need to know. They're owned by BlackRock and Vanguard, so that's the other financial pressure.
Yeah, they just haven't been bought by some other company. So conceivably, the company could be taken ownership of again in the way Elon Musk reprivatized Twitter. It's possible to do that. Not that that's going to happen, but unlike Dungeons and Dragons, which is owned by Wizards, who's owned by Hasbro, there's not this sort of chain of ownership above the firm, other than who owns the public shares. Obviously, that's playing a part in this too. Basically, what this divide you're alluding to gets to is there's two types of Warhammer 40k fans. There's your sort of millennial nerds who were taught that Warhammer 40k was this cool nerd hobby that they should get into, and they quote unquote like it. And then there's actual fans of Warhammer 40k who really understand the setting and the lore and everything. And this is really there's a sort of easy question that allows you to determine what type of fan you're talking to. Basically, the question is, who are the good guys in Warhammer 40k? In Warhammer 40k, there are all sorts of different factions, and this is something we haven't even gotten into. We've only given you all the backstory to Warhammer 40k, where there's a sort of obvious bad guy, good guy dichotomy. But in 40k itself, in the 41st and not the 31st millennium, there's all these different factions. The human faction is more or less portrayed as this, hyper religious, backwards, almost kind of fascist, totalitarian, decrepit empire. It's not really portrayed a particularly good light, right? So I wouldn't say most, but you're sort of typical millennial nerd who doesn't really comprehend the setting and is just sort of comprehending it through the cultural lens of modernity rather than the pure form of the thing, will just look at Warhammer 40k and be like, okay, well, there are no good guys. Everyone's the bad guy in 40k. The Imperium of Man are bad. The Tau, which is a sort of communist alien race, are bad. The Eldar, which are space elves, are bad. The Dark Eldar are bad because those are just the Slanesh worshippers of them. The Necrons are also bad. They're just Terminator robots. The Tyranids are bad. They're just alien from the Alien movies, right? But that's actually not true. The humans are the good guys. The Imperium of Man are the good guys. And that's the question you can ask. If you just ask who are the good guys in Warhammer 40k, you either say the Imperium of Man, or you give this stupid spiel I just gave because you actually understand anything and you've been taught to hate yourself. Basically,
it's the same thing of they're siding with the bugs again, right? With the Starship Troopers stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly it, actually. And yeah, of course, in fantasy you have Skaven fans as well. Ironically,
it's like how in the dark
fans. This entire city must be purged.
Oh my god. Okay, that's a pretty deep cut for Skaven.
My goodness.
Which are from the fantasy setting.
Yes,
Anyone
yeah.
want to do a quick rundown? of Skaven?
No, never.
Yeah, let's
Not-
just.
not
We've
worth
already
talking
gone.
about.
We've gone quite long. As it is, there's a bunch
So
of
yeah,
super
Cringe
chats
Hammer
that are piled
40K.
up.
Obviously, the thumbnail for the show is from this new animated cartoon called Space King. Would anyone like to, since I've been talking for a bit, would anyone like to give a spiel on Space King and its importance to modern Hammer 40K and what it is sort of doing in terms of protecting the Imperium of Man from the Slanesh worshippers?
Right, so-
Semigog and Mr. D immediately have hung up on the stream. Space King mentioned they're gone.
Yeah, but so I'll take the question here. So the reason why Space King is important is because, well, I don't know if anybody remembers, but Flash Gets, the YouTube channel, has had a couple spats over the years with Games Workshop and having their stuff taken down. They're basically a parody channel of Warhammer 40K. They put out good stuff all the time. But the most recent work is obviously Space King, and Space King has the importance that it does symbolically because it preserves a form of Warhammer as it originally was. It is, deeply comical, but it's a pastiche of reality in a way, or the way that Warhammer presents reality. It's it's a cartoon, so it's pretty simplistic and not nearly as like grim dark as the original setting, but it maintains elements of it, even with the bright colors and the rounded lines and all of that. But the important thing is that basically it's just Warhammer, the exact same setting with a couple slight name changes. The lore is pretty much the same. The universe as it is presented is exactly the same, but there's one key difference, is that it's not going in a woke direction. What the famous phrase of Captain, who's on the left in the picture here, is "no girls allowed." And this is precisely what our enemies want to do to Warhammer. They want to defile Warhammer. They want to make it gay and basically turn it into a basic bitch fantasy setting, like they've done the same way with every other fantasy and gaming and video game IP, right? The battleground of Gamergate has not changed. Well, sorry, the fight of Gamergate has not changed. It has just shifted battlegrounds from video games to tabletop now. And so the symbolic significance of Space King is that it is a unique and independent art form that allows us, even in our own small way, to say, no, we know what Warhammer is. We know what it always was. We know what it's supposed to represent. And what you say that Warhammer is bullshit. So that's what
So, I've never watched Space King, but that's a pretty good. That's a pretty good. A pretty good. Okay. Actually, I had a point I wanted to make off of that, Mandrill. Is Nick Land wrote an article recently, not recently, but like a couple of months, maybe a year or so ago, about the canon wars, right? And this is taking place at the higher parts of culture, with, the English classics, the Western classics, things like that. But it's also taking place down at what you would call lower culture, with Warhammer 40K being a kind of an outgrowth of pulpy lower culture, right? Though it does have its high moments. This battle is happening everywhere. This is the most famous example of the highest sci-fi setting, Star Wars, is emanating outward. The split between quote unquote canon and legends that began after Disney acquired the rights to Star Wars. These battles for fandoms, for the meaning of the fandoms, whether you're preserving older works and the spirit of older works, of older norms, as teams of millennial women who have acquired the IP rights are trying to completely alter these fandoms, thus altering any holdouts of culture, be it low or high. That's why they're trying to rewrite the classics, make edited versions of the Iliad or whatever. This battle is being fought everywhere, and every inch of territory matters, right? So it is just as important to fight and win these battles in settings like Star Wars and Warhammer 40K as it is to fight and win these. I wouldn't say just as important, but it is of importance to fight and win these battles in Warhammer 40K as it is to fight and win these battles for ensuring that the original printing of Charles Dickens or Cicero or Tacitus or other Western classics are preserved and are not altered by this utter woke nonsense.
Yes, 40K isn't even comparable to Star Wars in terms of its importance and whether or not it can actually be protected. There's another question you could ask similar to the one I posed before, which is Warhammer 40K satire? And the answer is no. But what these people will also do is, they'll claim like, the Imperium of Man. It's like the whole point is it's like a satire of a ridiculous, hyper-religious, backward space empire. Even if there's an anti-religious tone in the work because that's what the Brits who made it originally apparently intended, but that doesn't really matter. The setting is completely serious and it's not a satire at all. The best way to understand Warhammer 40K and why a show like Space King can exist, because there's a deep sort of humor in 40K because of how ridiculous it is. It's ridiculous the way Conan the Barbarian is ridiculous, right? It's so awesome and over the top. It's also funny at the same time, but it's also a completely serious piece. It's not like the movie is a comedy, right? Or it's not like Warhammer 40K is a comedy setting, although you can find comedy in sort of how over the top it is, blowing up entire planets and solar systems with the push of a button, and these sort of caricature characters like the Primarchs are, where, and names like Angron, Perturbo, Ferrus Manus, things like that.
Fun
Space
fact.
King just... Yeah, go ahead.
So real quick, you mentioned Angron. Angron is named after a bouncer for a gay bar that was on the same street as Game Workshop's headquarters by the name of Angry Ron, who was really mad. And that gay bar was called... Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, and
What was it called?
That gay bar was called The Rock.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible. So anyway, Space King leans fully into the comedy elements of 40K, right? It's basically if you took 40K, but instead of actually being a serious, setting with serious lore, it is actually a comedy, but it preserves all of the masculine elements that are deeply tied to 40K, and turns up to 11, basically protecting it in universe from the woke. And Space King is not Hammer, right? It's not Warhammer 40K, but effectively it is, and its mere existence is pretty much the only significant right-wing propaganda. People like to say right-wing art, but that's a misnomer. What they really mean is right-wing propaganda. This is really the only victory that I could even think of on this front, and it's only, the 5th episode is about to come out soon. It's, of course, hand-drawn. People like things like the Will Stancil show, for example, which is funny, but the Will Stancil show honestly doesn't even hold a candle to Space King in terms of the production quality and in terms of what it's actually doing in terms of sort of taking the fight to the enemy. This isn't really a defensive measure. It's a direct attack on an enemy castle, which is basically saying, we occupy this territory, and no matter what you do, no matter what you as Games Workshop owned by BlackRock and Fidelity try to do, and try to introduce things like female space marines and other characters where they don't belong, we're simply going to reject that and not just demand, but create and insist that Warhammer 40K is what it truly is, and not the corrupt Slaanesh hogwash you're trying to make it. And as I mentioned earlier, there are even mechanisms within the lore to work with this as well, because because the lore is presented in this way, where it's presented in universe, and there's this sort of concept of a unreliable author. Anything Games Workshop creates at this point can honestly and simply just be viewed as incorrect. So when Games Workshop says, there's female custodies, which are a sort of not Space Marine type character, they're trying to make female Space Marines, which is obviously their intent. We could just say, well, that's actually incorrect. You might have written something that says that, but that's simply incorrect lore, because wherever that came from is an unreliable source. So Warhammer itself is sort of particularly resilient, and it's being actively defended. And because of the way the lore is set up, and because the Imperium of Man, which is a religious fascist space empire, basically are unambiguously the good guys, even though people try to argue that it's satire, even though it isn't, right? It's very difficult to undermine, because the only alternatives to the Imperium of Man are a bunch of evil aliens trying to kill all of the humans. So there's sort of no alternative to possibly side with. And people will say the same about Space King, and then I'll finish my rant. There's this classic media literacy thing going on where it's like Space King is a parody of the Chudge, right? It's making fun of you just as much as it's making fun of the left. This is frankly retarded. Space King is not a parody of anything. It is a comedy. It's not a parody of Chuds or something. It's finding humor by taking sort of Chud archetypes and then turning them up to 11, like Hate Monger, the sort of blue-purple character there. He's basically a hater. He likes presenting statistics. Statistics is one of the main ways he expresses his hatred. You could obviously comprehend where that's going. So yeah, Space King, awesome show, free to watch on YouTube. I immediately subscribed to their Patreon after watching episode 1. Before even watching episode 2, it was so good. And I don't subscribe to anything on Patreon, so but it was that good and that profound, to be honest. And it's genuinely really funny, as you saw from the throwing girls into a pool of lava, because that's what, it's not a spoiler. That's on the first 30 seconds of episode 1. Basically, they go to this planet, and then they harvest all of the boys from the planet and then turn them into Space Marines. But they don't need girls, because girls aren't Space Marines, so they just throw them into lava. Yeah.
And where can people find Space King if they want to watch it?
Oh, it's just on YouTube. Space King
go.
episode 1. The guys are called Flash Gits. They actually have their own podcast that is pretty good, called Why Humans in 40K Are the Good Guys, actually. And it's a pretty good sort of probably 30-minute discussion, 20-minute discussion or something like that, just on why this idea that the humans are not the good guys is just completely backwards. Basically affirming that this isn't like some secret left wing. Oh, it's making fun of both sides. It's like, no, this is actually just making fun of libtard woke shit, and that's all it's doing. And it's celebrating how awesome our stuff is, and basically firmly planting the flag in Warhammer, such that castle cannot be conquered.
Yeah, you're laughing with the Chuds, not at them.
Oh, positive. There is never a reason to be negative.
Yeah, that's the what is that faction called? They're a parody of the Blood Angels.
Sanguinators, the Sanguinators faction.
The
Blood Angels
Sanguinators. Yeah, the factions in 40K are funny, because the Blood Angels are just they're Blood Angels, they're exactly what they sound like. So the ex-Sanguinator there was making B-positive puns about blood and stuff. Yeah, it was good.
Alrighty. Well, there you have it, fellas. Brief introduction to the various lore of Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40K, and why our guys should all take an interest in it. I myself and many of the other OGC Central guys have recently delved into Warhammer Total War, Warhammer 3, Maybe people have or live streams on that over the last couple of days. You will have to subscribe to channel memberships if you want to see those, because they're behind the paywall. Maybe we'll do those like once a week, or whenever we feel like it in the future. But I'm having fun with it. I'm having fun playing with the boys. It's a grand old time. So you guys can become channel memberships now of Old Glory Club, and you guys can watch the Total Warhammer 3 playthroughs that we are doing right now, and I'm having fun with it for sure. Why don't we tackle some of these super chats here in a moment? I realized I need the Google Doc for the super chats. Hold on one second. Talk amongst yourselves.
Actually, I was just reading chat. So there's actually a good point here that's worth pointing out. So Capitalismo actually points out that there is a Imperium of Man faction called the Sisters of Battle, which are these female warriors that are not Space Marines, but they're more or less interchangeable with Space Marines in terms of gameplay. They have their own unique units. They're not as strong or whatever, like in lore, but if you want to have female warriors or whatever, like that option exists, which makes the attempt to retcon previous things that were definitely not females and male only into including females, because it doesn't make sense to make super soldiers out of women, right? It doesn't make any sense. But there is an all-female faction that is playable, which makes the attempt to sort of wokeify the rest of 40K particularly obnoxious, because there was sort of already this carve out for that.
Right.
Personally, I think the Sisters of Battle should be retconned. Continue.
No, they're
I mean,
they're
that's
necessary for the setting, because they are the space nun faction in the obvious. If the Imperium of Man is Catholicism in space, then you need the space nun faction.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. But the Sisters of Battle have they're well established within the lore. There's a reason why they exist that goes back.
Nobody really plays them. They're a very rare army for a reason. They're like the Bretonians of 40K, basically.
There's no models for them. I think they
actually they have recently released plastic models, which is nice. I have like 20 pewter Sisters of Battle models I meant to paint at some point, but pewter's a pain to paint. That doesn't look particularly good. Just out of interest in the faction. But yeah, the warrior space nuns with a highly Catholic aesthetic is actually well suited to the narrative. And if you're going to have, women in a setting like this, it's a perfectly, appropriate and fine way to do it. It's not really subversive. And like you said, they've existed for a very long time and are well established. So I wouldn't oppose getting rid of the Sisters of Battle, but they're not really a problem.
How quickly the right winger recoils when I attack his woman faction.
I mean, I don't play them and I've never painted them. There's no denying that they look fucking cool. Like their tanks are, decked out with like giant organs that shoot missiles.
Yeah, the Burn the Heretics faction. They love rock and flamethrowers.
They use the fleur de lis symbology. Like it is a really cool looking faction, so it's kind of hard to complain.
Alrighty, well, there we have it. Why don't we go through some of these super chats, boys, and we'll call it a night. So, Solid Snake 1964 has once again snuck underneath his cardboard box behind enemy lines and is the first super chatter. For $5, he says, evening gents. Pleased to see a fun stream about Warhammer. Multiple of us, HRS, right? The Kansas chapter, yeah. Members will be very happy for the stream. The newest Warhammer game was pretty fun. If none of you have played it yet, Human Supremacy for the win. Yes, well, Home Range Society guys are into Warhammer. Very cool, very cool. I know quite a few other chapters are really, really big into it as well. So I would hope some of our guys have gotten together and played some tabletop wargaming amongst themselves. I'm sure that's happened at some point. City Breakdancer Man, one of our favorite super chatters here. Yeah, sure. Just remember on AA streaming, who always say it means so much to the one guy who super chat. It's funny how we have the chirp for City Breakdancer Man. Yes. For $5, he says, "The Emperor protects." Salute. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Real Americans.
Yes, and you are indeed a real American. Christopher Burke sends us $5. Where's my refund, ma'am? I'm not the IRS. Salute. Yeah, that's literally me like almost every single day with tax season right now. So it's the most wonderful time of the year, indeed.
Real Americans.
Yeah. Wolfgang sends us $15 and a salute. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it.
Real Americans.
Yes, you are a real American. Son of Haster for $5. I forgive you all for not inviting me on the Warhammer stream. Yeah, Son of Haster up in the new Ivy League is also a Warhammer friend. All right. Let's see. Wutan, our very own for $10 says, I want to play tabletop but have no friends. Is there some sort of organization I can join to find like-minded friends? Yeah. Yes, you too can join the Old Glory Club and find like-minded friends too.
I mean,
and also find that all of your like-minded friends all play Dark Angels too.
Yeah, it's true.
All right. No,
I mean, I play Dark Angels. Charlie, you play Dark Angels. Who else plays Dark Angels?
A lot of people.
Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
Anyway, no, I'm not Grim from Red Hood for $2 says, I think the Death Corps of Krieg are neat. I'll let the other guys
know. So that's Imperial Guardsmen.
Correct.
Yeah, we didn't even touch them.
They're just
they're
just your normal foot soldiers on more or less every planet. They're humans. They're not super soldiers. They're not space marines. They're not rare or space marines can't be created now in 40K, right? So there's a finite number. So normal foot soldiers, they're a totally fun faction to play. Not just the Death Corps, but there are tons of, as you can see, it's pretty obvious what the Death Corps of Krieg are stylized after, but you basically have a different Imperial Guardsman faction for literally everything you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, different units.
If you want to play that instead of Space Marines.
I'm still salty that they blew up Cadia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, though, I mean, it was certainly bold. I will give it that. It was a bold move, lore-wise.
I mean, I'm also a player for many years, so of course I played Cadians, so I'm.
But how could you be mad at the one sentence description of it? How could you be mad? Cadia broke before the guard did.
This is true.
Alrighty, we're moving on to Skibum220, one of our frequent super chatters, sent us $100. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. He says, in the grim dark future, there is only war. The Emperor protects. Salute the OGC. I'll salute to you, sir.
Real Americans.
Yes, thank you very much, Skibum. We appreciate it. Capitalissimo, our good friend, sends us $10. Games Workshop is a public company. 70% is held by institutional investors. Fidelity and BlackRock are two of the top 3 largest shareholders. I think Mandrill mentioned that earlier. Maybe it was Charlie. I forget. But yeah. Alrighty.
Yeah, that is true and unfortunate, but
we love private equity here at the OGC.
Yes.
Enrico Palazzo for $5 says custodies are male. Yeah, very true. No girls allowed. Yeah. No, I'm not Grim from Red Hood again sends us $2. Treat new Warhammer lore like new Fallout lore. That's lore I'm not familiar with either, so I'll take you guys' word for it.
I treat it like it doesn't exist, so I guess that's what he means.
Yeah, like the Star Wars sequels, and everything after Disney, right? Seasider for $10. Wow, he doesn't send us a salute. I'm shocked. For $10, he says, "No girls allowed." And then Seasider sends us $2. Hate mongers, not gay. He just hates aliens.
You were born gay. Enjoy it.
You never
Yeah,
know what's on the
hate monger
soundboard,
and actually hate Mace is my favorite character in Space King.
Oh yeah.
All right, that's us all caught up on the super chats. So we will call it here, folks. Once again, we now have OGC channel memberships where you guys can watch our gaming streams behind the paywall, or you have to catch them when they're live. And, they're kind of a spontaneous affair. So if you really want to make sure you don't miss anything, you're going to have to become a channel member and watch them. We've been having quite a bit of fun playing some Warhammer Total War 3. It's been a good time. Anything that you guys would like to shill, Mr. Mandrill?
Not at the moment.
Mr. Fahrenheidt?
No, nothing for me.
And Charlemagne?
Yeah, I do have a side gaming channel called Imperium Ludionum, which is, Latin for Empire of Games or something like that. One of my friends helped me with it. I just streamed some of the prologue campaign from Total War Warhammer 3 on there, just to help teach myself the game. So as you referenced earlier, we are doing some gaming streams now for members only on this channel. Some of us have been playing Warhammer anyway. I haven't, but I've joined now. If we're going to play some multiplayer games together, might as well stream it so others can enjoy as well.
Yes, indeed. The only other thing I have to shill is that I will be making an appearance on our good friend Mr. Dark Enlightenment's podcast, so everyone will be on the lookout for that. Not sure if that actually has been released or not yet. Been very, very busy with taxes, so people can go check that out. But we'll be back here on Monday for more American Spirits, Chapter House, of course, on Wednesdays, and another Pony Express Radio on Thursday. Maybe with some gaming content stream in between. We'll see you guys around.
When I pass on my good genes to my sons, they're going to join the Old Glory Club.